Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Joyce Hylton. She describes herself as a retired educator. However, I would say she is a current educator, having been the beneficiary of her knowledge when I took Master Gardener training on lawn care. She's been involved in many aspects of master gardening for over 21 years, and weeds became a special interest when she actually dug up a rosette of cardinal flower because she didn't recognize them. After that fiasco, learning about weeds and sharing that knowledge became one of her main interests. And without further ado, I'd like to turn over the program now to Joyce. Thank you, Joyce.
Good morning. And if you notice, the title of my program is Weeds on Our Minds, in Our Gardens and Lawns. There is no such thing as a fall weed per se. In fact, we're right at the intersection between the spring and summer weeds that have died and the fall weeds, the winter weeds that are winter annuals, that are going to start germinating pretty soon. So we're going to talk about all weeds, but the focus this time is really more along the idea that we're constantly thinking about the weeds. They nag us, we see them, what are we going to do? And from personal experience, I can tell you procrastination just doesn't work. But fall really is a great time to, first of all, assess the situation, get the necessary information, and then determine a plan of action. And that's kind of the focus of my whole presentation today. First, a word from our sponsor, but Colleen has already mentioned that this program is brought to you by the Virginia Cooperative Extension and by the Extension Master Gardeners. So here's a basic outline. We're going to do 3 parts. One, we're going to do some basic reconnaissance. We need the facts. We need to understand the basic idea of what is a weed. Second part, we're going to look at what do we do with them? We design our plan of attack, which is tools and when and where. And finally, we're going to learn a little bit more about the weeds, because if you know a particular weed's characteristics, then you know the best time to attack. So let's look at a definition. What is a weed? A plant whose virtues have yet to be recognized, and there really are some. It's a flower in disguise, true. A plant out of place, yes. The cardinal flowers that were mentioned earlier now appear all over my yard, and I don't like them growing under my trees, so I do pull them out there. Under my trees, they're weeds. A weed is an opportunist. It really is. It's going to fill an empty spot. Weeds possess certain characteristics that ensure their survival. And of course, the answer is F, all of the above, because no matter your definitions, they are plants that get in your way. They annoy you. And maybe we need to understand them a little bit better. So why do we have weeds? Experts say about 3% of the world's identified plants possess certain characteristics. So here's what they do. They produce abundant seed, and I'll be showing a chart on that shortly. They rapidly establish. When that seed hits the right spot, it germinates, it starts growing. Frighteningly, some of these seeds have a very long dormancy. They can be hidden in the soil for 10, 20, 30, 80 years and still be viable. They are adapted to easily spread. In other words, they'll spread through the wind, through the rain, through insects, birds, you name it, it easily moves. And finally, they have the ability to occupy any empty spot, particularly where we have disturbed the land. To quote the movie Field of Dreams, if you create a spot, weeds will come. Count on it. So the weeds' point of view, so maybe they aren't all bad. They are better than an empty lot. They provide soil stabilization and carbon sequestration, minimal admittedly, but better than nothing. Some actually have an ecological niche. They provide habitat and feed for wildlife. So we need to be aware of that. Many do provide nectar, for bees and other pollinators. And if you're observant, it may tell you something about your soil. Weeds provide exercise also. That's probably one of the more important ones for me. It's an opportunity to commune with nature. You get a little bit of exercise, or you can hire someone. Employment opportunities for the neighborhood kids, maybe. But let's talk about that ecological niche. Although we call them weeds, some of these plants do support a number of insects, and those insects we need to respect. There is a place for them. Our native weeds especially are desirable because they support certain insects, and these insects play a role. They are pollinators in themselves, and they also support our bird population. Some of you may be aware that increasingly we're seeing fewer and fewer of songbirds. We're taking away by killing all these insects. Maybe we are having a negative impact. Now, the use of herbicides doesn't kill the insect, but it does remove the plant that the insect depends upon. So when we're out getting rid of our weeds, maybe we need to think about just how important is it to get rid of that weed. I did mention that weeds are indicator plants. If you've got a spot in your yard or garden and you find that you have a cluster of the same weed appearing there, chances are that weed is giving you information about your soil. A soil test does a better job, but that weed appearing there over and over, particularly a cluster of them, says, I need to do a soil test. The most common problems that weed might be telling you is that the soil is too acidic. If you're able to go red sorrel, you definitely have acidic soil. It may be heavily compacted. Broadleaf plantain will move in there. Low fertility, Virginia pepperweed would appear there. Poor drainage, yellow nutsedge, great for that. And other plants where the pH is off, and so it makes it easier for the weed to grow than the desirable plant. So whatever it is, do a soil test. By the way, I mentioned the long-term survival. There's actually information that they found a lotus seed that was estimated to be about 1,000 years old, and it germinated. Some weeds really are prolific producers of seeds. In this chart, barnyard grass, one plant, can produce, a goody healthy one now, 700,000 seeds. And those seeds will remain viable in the soil for 5 years. Look at purslane, over 1 million seeds, and those seeds will remain viable in the soil for 20 to 25 years. Even black nightshade, seeds from that, eastern black nightshade, will remain viable in the soil for over 40 years, excuse me. So be aware of the fact that anytime you disturb the soil, you are lifting some of these seeds up where it gets a little bit of sunlight, and they're going to take advantage of it. So in our program here, we're going to look at different ways to avenues of attack. And basically, we're going to look at 3 things that we can do. 1, physical exertion, good old labor. We are going to look at organic and synthetic chemicals and how they may work. And then we're going to look at techniques to maybe just plain outsmart the weeds. Don't let the weeds outsmart us. Basic physical labor, elbow grease really does a great job. And for some people, weeding can be a sort of Zen experience. And that really is true for me. I enjoy sitting down and weeding for a while, listening to the birds, watching the bees and whatever else, but basically it's can be a nice relaxing experience. But as you're doing it, remember this: if it's an annual weed, pulling it up, great, you've got it. Even if you leave the roots behind, there's no problem, because annual weeds germinate from the seeds. However, if it's a perennial weed and you do not get that root, that taproot is coming back. Dandelion's one of the best examples. If you don't get that whole root, that dandelion is coming back. However, like I said, elbow grease is really a good and environmentally sound technique. However, there are some weed fighting tools that I find very helpful. If you notice in the first picture here, there are 4 digging tools. I love my trowel, particularly the fact that it has a very pointed end is very helpful. But I have 3 other tools. Now this is standard, just digging tool, common one, but my favorite one is a really long, very strong screwdriver. It goes deep into the soil. I love this one. But if I'm doing a short plant, like if I'm digging up violets, I prefer a little paring knife. The violet isn't that deep in the soil. And then, dig this down, pop it out and go. But I also will use chemicals, but I use them very carefully. And if you'll notice in my picture, I've got these 3 white cylinders plus actually it's a coffee can, I believe. Anything that's open at both ends. Now my white cylinders are made from 4-inch PVC sewer pipe, easily cut with a saw. And I cut it into 3 different lengths. I've got a tall one. If I've let a weed grow and get really tall and it's a perennial weed and I need to get the root out, I will use the taller one. Otherwise, I use my shorter ones. So let's look at an example of a dandelion. All right, the dandelion is in the lawn. Actually, this is a pretty weedy lawn, but the dandelion is surrounded by I pulled the leaves up and around my dandelion. And so in this cylinder, only the leaves of the dandelion are visible. I will then use a systemic. Glyphosate is probably what I will use, but I use it sparingly. I only need it to touch the leaves. I will squeeze it maybe twice, but I won't stand there and squeeze it multiple times. I don't need to soak it. I just need enough to touch the leaves, and the leaves then will transport the chemical to the roots and it will kill the plant. It dries in about 30 minutes. I can remove the cylinder and the plant will slowly die. It doesn't keel over immediately, guys. It'll take maybe up to 2 weeks before it really dies. But I've been able to use a chemical. I've been able to do it without affecting anything else in the environment. Now, I also have a technique for trapping them. This is particularly true for nuisance vines. It works on greenbrier. It will work on bindweed. And so let's look at the next slide. Here's what I do. I take a stake. I put it beside a vine that I want to get rid of. In this case, it's porcelain berry. I then take the plastic sleeve from a newspaper. I open it at both ends. I then slide the sleeve down over the plant, but only as long as the sleeve itself is. I tie it very tight at the bottom. I open up the sleeve at the top. And once again, I spray. I don't do it heavily. I just need to get the leaves covered. The leaves will then transport the chemical to the roots and kill the plant. Now, for some of these vines, especially well-established ones, I may have to do this more than once. And in the case of greenbrier several years ago, it took me 2 years, and it may have even been a 3rd year to finally get the greenbrier, out of my azalea bush. But I did it safely and easily. So there is a place for using chemicals, but use them carefully. Moving on. When we're talking about chemicals, I'm very aware of this, and I want you to be aware that chemicals can impact the soil. So we don't want to overuse them. We don't want to abuse them. Too much of a particular chemical can contaminate the soil. I mean, think about, this is more than just an herbicide, but think about an oil spill, or think about where they've removed the gas tanks at a gas station. That soil is basically not usable. So too much of a chemical can contaminate the soil. If you've got shallow-rooted plants nearby and you've allowed excess chemicals to be used, it can affect these other plants. Plus, if the water tables around with rain and so forth, it can wash into the streams. So here's my request. If you use chemicals, please follow label directions. By the way, it has been suggested that adding organic material to the soil encourages the biodegradation of pesticides and other chemicals. So please use these herbicides or any pesticide carefully. I'm going to look at a chart. I want you to understand as we plan our attack on weeds that all weeds do not respond to all chemicals the same way. Just like medicine works for some of you and not for others, same thing is true for a weed. So when you buy this weed killer and it says weed killer, don't believe it's going to work on every weed out there. It'll work better on some than on others. So if you've got a particular weed that you are focusing on, it's better to understand what that weed needs to be killed than to just go out and buy a generic weed killer. Virginia Tech puts out a chart on broadleaf weed control. And those of you who registered got a copy of this, but I want to go through this and explain to you how it really works and why it's such a wonderful chart. First of all, it's going to identify a weed and it's going to tell you how that weed is classified, annual, perennial, etc. But then it's going to talk about 5 different chemical combinations. These are the most common ones, not the only ones, by the way, but the most common ones out there. So 2,4-D and dicamba, 2,4-D and mecloprop, 2,4-D, dicamba and mecloprop, 2,4-D, dicamba and pinoxylum. Okay, excuse me, tricloper and this one, pinoxylum and that one. Both of those are systemic herbicides. So I'm only giving one example, and that's a weed called bedstraw. Weed is classified as an annual, but do you notice a little footnote there? It's a 1. It's an annual that can't decide, is it a summer annual or is it a winter annual? It can be both. So don't be surprised if you see it so sort of out of season. However, if you're spraying it, you want something, a chemical that's going to attack it well. The bedstraw is susceptible to the first combination. It's susceptible to the 4th combination, but notice that middle combination, it's resistant to barely responsive. You would choose, if you could, this one is probably your best choice, or that one. But what a lot of people don't realize, it's best treated in the spring. If I see it in the summer, will it respond to the chemical? Not as well. It's most vulnerable in the spring. So use that chart. It doesn't cover all weeds, but it gives you an idea that some weeds are better treated at a certain time of year. Some weeds are better treated with one chemical over another. Now, I know a lot of you want to use organics, but the organics, by the way, are just like synthetics because the synthetic herbicide got its idea from the original one, the one that occurred naturally. Many people think that because it's organic, it's safer. That is not necessarily true. So they say be careful of those that are labeled non-chemical alternatives. They use the same molecular structure. And by the way, most organic weed control products kill or injure desirable grasses. So if you're using it as a weed treatment in your lawn, it's not going to work. Let's look at some of these organic weed control products. Clove oil, vinegar, you've heard of all of this, but please notice that this only attacks seedling weeds, young weeds. Vinegar is something a lot of people like, and I've certainly used it. But once a plant is well established, vinegar is just going to insult it. It's not going to kill it. You may take it multiple times, but if you keep using vinegar, vinegar can change the pH of the soil. So know what you're using, know where you're using it and why you're using it. Using it for seedlings, great. Using it after that plant is well established, it's just not going to work. And maybe digging it up really is the best way. Now, some of you have heard of pre-emergent herbicides, and our pest management guide has identified 10. They're all chemical. Essentially, with one exception, do not use a pre-emergent herbicide on your lawn to prevent weeds if you are also putting down seeds, because a pre-emergent herbicide works on an idea of preventing the seed from germinating. So if you put down grass seed and a pre-emergent herbicide, you don't stand a chance. So don't use weed and feed when you're, starting out a lawn. However, it can be used later on. If the only seed you're targeting are weed seeds, a pre-emergent is good. One of the neatest things that we've learned is controlling crabgrass, at least in our area now. And by the way, I hear we got some people in different areas. So depending on your particular climate zone, you may have a slight adjustment in the timing. But here, when the forsythia bloom is when you put down a pre-emergent to control crabgrass, and it really works. It's one of the easiest weeds to control. Timing is of essence. Now, here's a neat thing to think about. To control winter annuals, the pre-emergent needs to be put down in the early fall. Might be thinking about it right now. For summer annuals, the pre-emergent must be applied in the late winter or early spring. And crabgrass would be considered a summer annual, spring or summer annual. And it responds well to the pre-emergent. By the way, corn gluten is a moderately effective pre-emergent. And it's great, and it's organic now, but it is a fertilizer. So if you use it, it's putting nitrogen into the soil. And if nothing is using that nitrogen, then that really is not good. So you want to think about when and how you use corn gluten. So to summarize this, the best weed defense in your garden is use mulches. Plain and simple. Your grass clippings, for example, spread lightly throughout the garden. Let them dry. In other words, you don't want a thick layer of grass because it stinks when it starts to decompose. But spread it out, and over several weeks, it dries, and you add to it, and it makes a nice weed barrier. Shredded leaves do a great deal. Leaf mulch. Pine needles are wonderful, particularly around acidic plants such as your azaleas and rhododendrons. Shredded hardwood works. I tend to use that mostly in my paths and so forth, but even commercial products like the fabric, the weed block fabric or black plastic, anything like that works to hold down the weeds. And finally, in your lawn, if you keep your lawn healthy, you really will have very few weeds. And one of the best things you do if you have a fescue lawn is mow high, 3 to 4 inches. It keeps the weeds from getting a foothold. It crowds them out. By the way, if you've got a zoysia or a Bermuda grass lawn, you do cut those much shorter, but they are such densely matted grasses that it's awfully hard for weeds to get involved there. So I think this is a good place to pause. Are there any questions?
Okay, Joyce, yes. There was an interesting one. Someone asked about plug aeration, bringing weeds to the surface. Is that a problem?
It can be. It absolutely can be. So if you're going to leave the plugs on the soil, you've got to immediately put down your grass seed or whatever you're doing and immediately put down some sort of light, I'll call it a mulch over it to kind of protect the soil until the seeds germinate, not a heavy mulch. Personal experience, and I do have a very small lawn, I actually rake up those plugs and collect them and put them in a hole. I've always got a hole somewhere in my gardens, so I just move them elsewhere. I do not leave them on my lawn, but it is a true fact.
Okay. We have lots of questions about specific weeds that I'm going to save toward the end because you may cover some of them.
I probably will.
Otherwise, we're good to go.
Okay, and we will move on to learning about our enemies. So in the next few slides, we're going to start looking at the weed mugshots and see if you recognize something in your yard. Make a note of its habits, and that's where you begin. Understand the weed's habits so you know how to attack it, and you know what tools you choose to use. So First idea is you've got to understand, are you dealing with a perennial or an annual? And that's important because perennials will put down roots that if you don't kill the roots, it doesn't work. So anytime you're dealing with a perennial, you've got to have something that disturbs the root, either dig it up or kill it. Annuals, however, germinate from seeds. So you can pull those up and it doesn't matter. What you want to do is pull them up before they produce seed. That's your goal. If you're like me, it's like, uh-oh, too late. But keep that in mind. Biennials, by the way, are plants that have 2 seasons. They grow their leaves and so forth. In the first year, they flower and produce seed in the second year. So it's the second year that you're most concerned about. So keep this in mind. Perennials die down to the ground. So in the winter, that perennial is still there, but you can't see it. The roots are alive. So putting down a pre-emergent will never, ever work with a perennial. It only works with seeds. Annuals, of course, complete their life cycle in 1 year. And we try to, if you really could understand it all, figure out exactly when each of these seeds start to germinate and then put down your pre-emergent. However, lacking that, you're going to be using either pulling it up, a little hand labor, or using broadleaf perennials. All right, so we're going to go through a whole series of slides. I'm going to try to tell you about the major characteristics of each of these grasses to begin with, and grass-like perennial. All right, Bermuda grass is wonderful as an athletic field. It's wonderful for lawns as if it's maintained. But if it gets into your garden, you don't call it Bermuda grass, you call it wiregrass, and you scream and pull your hair out. Bermuda grass's attributes, is one, it produces stolons along the ground, and anytime a node touches the soil, it puts down a root. But that's not enough. It also produces rhizomes that go beneath the soil. So it's got a root mass beneath the soil. It's got the stoloniferous mass above the soil. It's next to impossible to kill it. It's great on an athletic field because it withstands the heavy foot traffic and it provides a slight cushioning effect. So it is desirable. And it's becoming some people consider it a desirable lawn weed here in Northern Virginia. It's moving that direction. If you go further south, it is a lawn weed. I shouldn't say a lawn weed, it's a lawn grass. In your garden, it's a weed. Nimblewill is a native plant, it's a weed. And it too, when it appears in your yard, has a sort of a grayish green to it. It's a different color from your traditional grass. And it puts out stolons. And anytime it touches the ground at a node, it roots and it spreads like wildfire. It is not easy to get rid of. And I'll share with you, I had a patch that appeared in my yard. I finally said, okay. And by the way, I have a small lawn, so it's not real big. And I wanted to get rid of this patch. I actually killed it. I used glyphosate on this one little area. Once it was totally dead, I cut it out, dug it up, went out and bought a chunk of sod, planted it. I felt so good. However, all around the edge of the sod, the nimblewill reappeared because I didn't get all of the stolons. Such is life. All right, so let's look at some other undesirable grasses and why they exist. Now, these are all perennials. The one here on the lower right is a native grass, Poa trivialis. And it will appear in your lawn. If it appears in your lawn, it has a coarser texture than your grass. You'll be really suspicious, but it's a perennial, so it will keep coming back unless you dig it up. Quack grass and orchard grass were imported in the 1800s as a forage grass for our livestock. And the seeds remain viable in the soil for a long time. And we really notice them in our lawns if we see that we mow the lawn, and in the case of the quack grass and the orchard grass, they suddenly appear, in fact, the Dallas grass too, they suddenly grow faster than the regular grass. They'll be taller and a slightly different color. Dallas grass was brought in 1900, but again, for livestock. And again, the seeds remain viable in the soil, so suddenly it just appears in your lawn. Orchard grass, by the way, it's kind of easy to identify once it gets going, and that is right at the base of the leaf. It is sort of whitish looking, but it's a flat, very flat base to the leaf. Nutsedge, yellow nutsedge. By the way, there are a lot of sedges out there, and all of them are not bad. There's some sedges you may want to consider, excuse me, but nutsedge can be an indicator plant. It loves moist areas. This photo here is taken at the base of a hill and right at the edge of a road. Water collects there. This plant thinks it's great. It's hard to control nutsedge because it doesn't respond to many herbicides at all. If you pull it up, you may leave behind these little nutlets or bulblets, if you wish, that will remain viable for a number of years. And of course, when it goes to seed, it spreads everywhere, and these seeds can remain viable for up to 80 years. This guy is not going to go away easily. So when you see it, and if you can't dig it up, at least keep it cut as short as possible so it cannot produce seed. Wild garlic. Most of us end up calling it wild onion, but it's not. It's wild garlic. What makes it different? And they smell alike if you bruise the leaves, but if you cut the leaf in half, the cross section of that leaf will be hollow inside. It's round, but the cross section of wild onion is flat. There is no hollow. And by the way, this is one thing that if it doesn't respond well to herbicides, the timing is critical if you're going to use an herbicide. Otherwise, it's dig it up. My last one that I've put in is a really new invasive plant. I think it was first discovered in Maryland in the 1990s. They don't know how it got into the country. It's called wavy leaf basket grass. And if you notice, the leaves have this little crinkly appearance to them. If you see that. The problem with this is this produces seeds that remain viable for quite some time, but it also produces stolons that move out rapidly. It moves into our forests, it moves everywhere, and does not respond well to, right now we haven't found a herbicide that works easily. So if you see it small, get rid of it as soon as possible. Now, those are grasses that are perennials. Now we're going to look at some broadleaf perennials, such as the buttercup. Many of you see this in your yard. It actually reproduces by seed, but it does have a small bulb at the base and roots. And it's short, it's attractive, it crowds out your grass, but if you like it, leave it. Maybe learn to love it. Maybe make your whole lawn buttercups, though they won't last through the winter months. They go dormant. Star of Bethlehem, my personal nuisance, nemesis. This plant is actually sold as an ornamental. It is a beautiful bloom. It is lovely, but there is absolutely, right now, they do not know of any herbicide that will control it. When it first starts coming up, the leaves make you think it's going to be a crocus, but then suddenly you get these lovely star-like flowers and you realize you're in trouble. Not only does it produce seeds that go everywhere, but the bulbs multiply fairly rapidly, and they're awfully hard to control. You actually have to dig these up. The dandelion. I love this picture here on the bottom left. I think it's gorgeous. I am so glad they're nowhere near me. But the dandelion is easily identified in its little rosette. If you notice, the leaves here always point back toward the base. If they have their way in nice loose soil, such as my niece's raised garden bed that had not been used for a number of years, I dug this dandelion out. The root is almost 18 inches long. Notice it did break off. So if it's got good loose soil, it's happy. Ground ivy is another pain in the neck for a number of people. Some people call it creeping Charlie. It's in the mint family. The stem is square. If you crush the leaves, it'll have a mint smell to it, but it's also an indicator plant. It really likes cool, shady, moist areas. And it's tough to get rid of because it puts down rhizomes. It goes, not only do the stolons move along the top of the soil, but it puts down rhizomes. And if you don't get the whole rhizome, if you dig it up and you leave a little piece of that rhizome, it's coming back. So this is a tough one, real tough one to control. Potentia indica, they finally moved the false strawberry into a new genus, the Potentia. We call it false strawberry or Indian strawberry. It's not a strawberry. It produces a yellow flower where the real strawberry produces a white flower. It does produce red berries. They are not poisonous. They are tasteless and very, very seedy. But it's spread around. Sometimes you see a lot of it in an area. You may want to look at the pH of the soil. Here, for comparison, this is a true wild strawberry. White flowers, little tiny red fruit. All right, horse nettle. Oh, a fun one to have in your yard. Horse nettle is a pain in the neck. It puts down rhizomes that move under the ground up to 3 feet away. I mean, it travels. And once it puts up a second plant, it puts out more rhizomes and it keeps moving around. So when you kill this plant, I do use, this is one that I use one of my tall cylinders on. I was certain to kill that. And it took me several attempts because it kept coming up elsewhere in my yard. It produces spines underneath the leaf along the midrib. And you can see some of the spines on the stem here, as well as on the midrib. You don't grab this plant to pull it up. Broadleaf dock, there's also a curly dock out there. Again, opportunist, if you don't dig it up fairly quickly, it puts down a very strong and deep taproot. It does bloom. It puts up a bloom that then turns brown as it goes to seed, and the seeds are easily dispersed. This is a plant that you will need to get rid of early on. Mouse ear chickweed. There are two types of chickweeds. There's the annual chickweed and mouse ear chickweed. They're telling me I'm not talking loud enough, so I will try to make it even louder. The mouse ear chickweed is a perennial, and please notice that the leaves have a slight fuzzy edge to them. If the flowers are inconsequential, they bloom before you know it and produce seeds before you know it, and you've got additional plants. And if you don't get the root when you pull it up, it is coming back. We've all seen broadleaf plantain. Growing up, we called it grasshopper weed, but at any rate, the plantain is a good indicator of compacted soil or poor quality soil. So if you see a bunch of this growing like this patch, you may want to do a soil test to decide what it is. Now, it is a perennial. It will come back. So when you pull it up, you want to get the whole root. It has a little small, both fibrous and taproot. You've got to get the whole root. Buckhorn plantain is another plantain, pretty much like the broadleaf in that it can indicate poor quality soil. The difference is the leaf with parallel venation. You can see that. The violet. Some people love them, some people hate them. I had a neighbor that collected everyone out of her lawn, every little violet out of her lawn, but put them in a special place between the driveway and the sidewalk. In the spring, it was gorgeous, beautiful violets, but their beauty is short-lived maybe. This plant, I dug it up, looks like it has the beginnings of some more seed buds, flower buds, but those are not. Those are seed pods. So after they bloom, they begin to produce these seed pods. I've forced this seed pod open. So you can see the seeds, they're white. A mature one would have black seeds. But the point is, when this seed pod opens and distributes its seed, the ants will willingly plant this violet for you. So if you want to get rid of the violet, you want to dig it up before it produces the seed pods. Yellowwood sorrel, also a broadleaf perennial. It's even edible, by the way. And if you pull it up, it seems so easy to pull up, but if you leave any of that root in the ground, it's coming back. The only way to control it is to get that root out of the ground. And yes, it does respond to herbicides. It has a cousin, creeping wood sorrel. And creeping wood sorrel has this reddish color to it, produces yellow blooms, but look at the taproot on this. The yellow wood sorrel, creeping wood sorrel puts down really strong taproots. You've got to dig that out. And by the way, this does not respond well to most herbicides. It's difficult to control. Hedge bindweed. Here, and this is from my I had some daylilies here. By the way, bindweed produces white blooms. These are not morning glories. And most people look at it and say, oh, morning glory. It's a white bloom. Bindweed has distinctive spear-like shape. The other one, field bindweed, not quite as angular, but still spear-shaped leaves. Now, bindweeds have put out these wonderful rhizomes underneath, and they will spread. And the only way to deal with them is to use my stake method. You put the stake in the ground, you use the open plastic sleeve over the stake, encourage the weed to climb out on your stake and treat it. And sometimes it will take more than one treatment to get it under control. Mugwort, an interesting weed that doesn't put out a pretty bloom at all. In fact, when most people see it, they think, oh, particularly at the beginning, I have a mum. It looks like a mum, but if you crush the leaves, it has an unpleasant odor, but it also is tenacious. If you don't get all of the root out of the ground, this guy is coming back year after year after year. By the way, for comparison, on the left, we have mums. On the right, we have mugwort. And a slight lookalike occasionally is this one. But some of you allergy sufferers may know ragweed very well. So there is a resemblance. And by the way, mugwort gets established because you think it's a mum, and then when you discover it's not, it's maybe too late. White clover. This is another perennial that was brought into the country for livestock feed. And in the 40s and 50s and 60s, everyone wanted clover in their lawns because clover does put nitrogen back in the soil. However, today, no one wants clover in their lawns. They try to get rid of it. And that's why no one can find a four-leaf clover anymore. Red sorrel. This is the guy that really likes wet areas. It likes poor soil, but it has an unusual characteristic that makes it dangerous for livestock. The leaves collect, absorb, and hold oxalates. So if livestock graze on this, it can actually kill sheep. It can make larger livestock sick. So farmers do not want to see red sorrel anywhere around. This lawn marsh pennywort has been the bane of our existence in the demonstration organic vegetable garden. When it started out, we didn't think much about it. However, suddenly it has taken over. It's a tiny, tiny plant. If you notice, the stems look very fragile. They break off, but it's a perennial, meaning if we don't get all of that root out, it's coming back in spades. Because we're an organic garden, we cannot use or choose not to use herbicides, and we are having problems with it. This is an invasive plant. It loves moist areas. So that's probably the key thing. If we could stop watering the garden, maybe it would go away, but I don't think that's the way to go. We think, and by the way, it's not just in our area, nationwide in doing the research. One of the sources think that some people actually emptied their aquariums that had this in the aquarium, and it took off. Regardless, it is not easy to control, particularly in the organic garden. Pokeweed. This is a native weed, and the birds love it. however they plant it anywhere. And if you aren't careful, it can get quite tall. And this produces a taproot. A well-established plant can produce a taproot that's 6, 7, 8 inches long. You really have to dig it out. The berries and the leaves are poison for us, but as I said, the wildlife love it. And the last of my broadleaf weeds, perennial weeds, this is really semi-perennial, maybe biennial, but it's called robin's plantain. It's really a wildflower. And the neat thing about it, some people choose to use it as a ground cover because it does produce these beautiful leaves and they stay low for a year. And then the next year, like I said, biennial to perennial, it will bloom. It puts up a tall stalk of blooms. Oh, I almost forgot, and moss. And if you've got moss growing in your lawn, it's telling you there's something wrong with the pH. And it's also telling you it's probably a fair amount of moisture there. And in some cases, maybe some soil compaction. So soil test to decide what to do with moss.
Okay, Joyce, I'm going to interrupt you there. I'm going to ask
Okay.
you about one annoying plant, bamboo, since you've already covered grasses. Do you have any suggestions for people?
Don't grow it, but it is not easy to control. So here's what we know about bamboo in general, and there are different types out there, but assuming that your neighbor planted it, you didn't, and so forth. Sometimes the only thing you can do is put down a barrier, such as digging down a foot or so and putting in, maybe cement or a steel barrier. But the other thing you can do is start cutting it early on when it's young, by the way, when it's first coming up in the spring. You cut it, and if you will put a systemic on that cut area around the edge, no, not the center, around the edge, do this on a regular basis, it will carry it to the root and it will eventually take care of it, but it takes persistence. And I will add that it's a good idea for those who are in other parts of the country to double check with their cooperative extensions for their recommendations about controlling bamboo.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any comments on the use of burnout, which is a clove and citric acid combo?
Well, again, use it, but it's only going to work on seedlings. You can't use it in your lawn because it kills turf. So, and if you're doing it on a mature plant, you're going to injure it, but it's not going to kill it. It may take multiple treatments to eventually kill it. So yes, it works, but it's the weed you choose and the time you choose to use it.
Okay, and someone else asked about two plants you've mentioned. They have ground ivy invading their moss, which they like and want to keep. Do you have any suggestions about dealing with that situation?
It reminds me a little bit of a story that I read in Southern Living probably 20 years ago. A man who was trying to grow the lawn, but he only had moss, and he said, I give up, I'm going to grow moss. And he focused on growing moss. So what he ended up doing was pulling grass out of his moss. So I wish you well, because ground ivy is tough to control regardless of where it's growing. You've got to get every one of those stolons out. The only choice might be to deliberately, where it's growing, deliberately kill the moss and the ground ivy using, and it's going to have to be a systemic, one time killing it, digging that out, and then encouraging moss to fill it in and hope that that works.
Okay.
Okay.
There are more questions about individual plants, which I'm going to save till the end. So why don't we go ahead?
All right, let's move on. And again, now we're going to look at winter annuals. And here's what you need to focus on. If you're dealing with a winter annual, it will germinate, the seeds start germinating in the fall. Common chickweed is a good example here. And in general, it will germinate when the temperatures fall below 75 degrees for extended periods. So keep that in mind. These plants will germinate, will flower and fruit in the winter and early spring, then die in the summer. But their seeds are waiting to complete the cycle over and over again. Knowing that, you might try using a pre-emergent in certain areas where you've got a real problem, but be aware of the air temperature. And by the way, it doesn't cover all plants are different. If you garden at all, you know that you can plant peas in the ground and the soil when it's fairly cool. You don't put tomatoes out until much warmer weather. So it just depends on the plant, how it's going to respond. So let's look at some of the annuals. And I'm going to start with one that many lawn owners in our area scream about, and that's a grass called Poa annua. And Poa annua is a bunching grass. It grows in clumps. It's really quite pretty in the spring. It's a prolific seed producer. One healthy plant can produce up to 10,000 seeds, which really makes me feel good. The downside of this grass is that it cannot handle heat. So it dies in the summer. And if you've got it growing in your lawn, suddenly you have these dead spaces in your lawn and you blame it on some poor dog in the neighborhood who was passing through, and it's not true. It's the Poa annua dying. In your garden, it's fairly easy to pull. It's the roots, it's a fibrous root system, easy to pull. And though it technically is we're referring to it as a winter annual, it's one of those that, well, maybe it wants to be a summer annual too. We're beginning to see it appear at other times too. Hairy bittercress is a lovely pain in the neck, very delicate plant, actually quite pretty, but it produces these seed pods, these long, slender seed pods that when they dry, if you brush against them, they will explode and can travel, 10 feet out. It germinates fairly quickly. And in a good season, notice this, good season, you might have 2 crops or even 3 if it gets, with climate change, if it gets warm enough early enough, we may have more of these. It's easily pulled, and that's the one thing you need to do. If you're walking around your garden and you see the little rosette, a smaller version of the big picture, much smaller, the leaves are very distinctive, very distinctive. Do pull it. All right, common chickweed. Yes, my passion for weeds is that I allow them to grow to just see what they do. So this is in my yard, this lovely rosette. The neat thing about common chickweed, though, is that you can pull it up. It's not going to come back, but pull it up before it produces flowers. That's what you need to do. Or you can lift, in this case, lift up that little mound there and just simply cut it at the base. It is not going to come back. There are 2 plants that look a little bit alike, like henbit and dead nettle. And so, the henbit is distinctive by the leaf. If you'll notice, there'll be a long stalk and then its leaf that encircles the stalk. And the leaf has these scallops around it. It's almost like an Elizabethan collar around the plant. So there'll be a break, collar, break, collar. But at the top, it has these interesting little blues. And I've actually seen a field that was all of this, and it was beautiful. Dead nettle, on the other hand, produces a different structure. The leaves are basically this triangular shape, but the leaves are all grouped at the top of the plant. There is no stalk in between. I mean, there is a stalk down lower, but all the leaves are at the top of the plant. But the flower is very similar. Well, you can't see much of the flower there, but the color of the flowers are similar. The distinction will be the leaf. These are very easily pulled. I mean, you really don't need to go out and use a chemical. There are so many types of veronicas or speedwells, are 2 different terms. That's hard to determine. It could be corn, Persian, field, ivy leaf, plus there are a few others. There's thyme leaf and on and on and on. This one, I believe to be corn veronica, a corn speedwell. It puts out these itty bitty tiny blue flowers. It spreads out in the mat if you give it a chance. But look at the picture at the bottom. When it's ready to go to seed, it suddenly, instead of being prostrate, it will suddenly become erect so it can spread its seeds a little bit farther. Again, this is easily pulled. Virginia pepperweed. This is an example of a plant that takes lousy soil. Here it is along a curb on a street. The soil is not maintained, it's not watered, it's not fertilized, and pepperweed thinks it's great. There's the little seedlets. It's sometimes called a poor man's pepper, but it's a good indicator plant that the soil is not the healthiest here. Again, this can be pulled up. All right, now summer annuals, listen carefully. They germinate in the spring as soon as the soil temperature is warm. Keep that in mind. So as soon as the soil starts to warm up, we have some of these warmer days, these weeds are going to be germinating. So let's look at summer annuals. Crabgrass is a pain in the neck, but it's so easy to control. When you first see it, it's easily pulled. However, if you don't pull it in time, it's a prolific seed producer, and it's going to come back next year from the seeds. And that's why you want to put down a pre-emergent when the forsythia is blooming. And that way you can prevent it from appearing at all. There's one other grass that appears sometimes in the summer, and this is an annual, and it's goosegrass, and it's distinctive because it'll have kind of this white base, not quite like orchard grass. It's a little bit thicker base, but it will crowd out any of your other grasses. So if it appears in your lawn, it'll do this. You can see that. However, it also will handle lousy soil. So I've found it along, curbs. I've found it in pathways. It can handle compacted soils fairly well, but it can be dug out easily. Foxtail, just an interesting weed, I suppose, but it can be kind of decorative. It's attractive. It doesn't spread rapidly, but it does spread, and it's easily pulled. Virginia copperleaf. It gets its name because particularly early on, it will have a copperish color around the base of the leaf. If you can see it there. When it matures, it has a copperish color to it. Those yellow flowers behind it are not part of this slide. I should have chosen a different one. But it does have inconsequential blooms along the stalks, which produce seeds, and they come back again. Copperleaf, this plant is easily pulled. Again, you don't really need an herbicide. Get out there and do a little pulling. Japanese steelgrass, an invasive grass, but in this case, it can be somewhat controlled. It can be pulled. It does respond. It's an annual, so we can pull it. And if you can prevent it from going to seed, then it gives you even more control. Problem is, it grows easily in our woods, etc. It has escaped. Our request is that if you see it, pull it up, or if it's in your lawn or garden and you can't pull it up, cut it short or choose an herbicide, but don't let it go to seed. Morning glory, just wanted to show this different color blooms, but nothing white here. This is the ivy leaf. That's the entire leaf, morning glory. They really are fun, but they're prolific seed producers. And if you don't watch them, they'll be climbing up every shrub you have in your yard. Black medic, it has a yellow clover, like it is in the clover family. It has a little yellow bloom, and it's an indicator plant of poor soil. Chances are heavily compacted soil, possibly a problem with the pH. Here's one that's been a bit of confusion for me. There is something called Pennsylvania smartweed, but there are a series of polygonums, Persicaria. This one is a smartweed, but it technically isn't the Pennsylvania smartweed because it has a thumbprint. Do you see the little dark area, the little thumbprint? So this is better known as lady's thumb. Again, this is one that is easily pulled. It will appear throughout your garden. It sneaks up on you. It likes moist areas. But again, you don't need to use herbicide, just pull it. Purslane, remember this earlier slide chart? Prolific seed producer. On the Plus side, it is an edible weed for those who like it. And it's also easy to pull. It is not a difficult weed to control. Spurge, another fascinating weed for me. In the sense, spotted spurge is slightly different names, but it will have a single sort of taproot, short taproot. And from that will grow this huge mat. And if nothing's in the way, the mat gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But all you need to do is pull up the little root and it's gone. You want to do it before it produces seeds because it produces the blooms and the seeds very rapidly. I mean, you turn your back, oh, too bad, seeds are out there and it's coming back next year. But if you can pull it before it produces seeds, then you have some control. Spiny sow thistle. I like to explore things that volunteer in my yard, so I allowed this guy to grow. This was the initial rosette. And I wasn't real certain what it was going to be, but I do know now. Spiny sow thistle, a really healthy one. It liked the soil I had. The leaves wrap around the stalk. There are spines along the leaf. You cannot grab this plant and pull it up without gloves, but it does pull up, by the way, because it is an annual. For the allergy lovers out there, this is your nemesis, common ragweed. This is the bloom. There is no flower here that you can see, no discernible flower, but it perhaps produces more pollen than almost any other plant. And those who have the allergy to ragweed, you know it well. And it will be producing the pollen probably September into October. So the season is here, beware. However, when you see it growing before it produces its bloom, and certainly before pollen, this is another plant that actually is easily pulled. So if you recognize it, pull it up. So the next time you're walking through your neighborhood and you see it growing on the sidewalk or edge of the sidewalk, pull it up. Carpet weed. This one interests me in the sense that this is a weed that if you give it a flat area, it spreads out. It's a carpet. But if it can't go flat, it starts to climb anything around it. Again, this is a weed that's easily pulled. And all of these weeds that are easily pulled are easily prevented by using mulches. Fairly new to our area is something called false hawksbeard. And it'll put out a rosette like this. And as it matures, it will put out a stalk, and on top of the stalk will be these little yellow flowers. It too produces the seeds fairly quickly. You see it blooming, you close your eyes and look back and uh-oh, there the seeds are flying through the air. So if you don't want it around, don't let it bloom and pull it up. Japanese clover. Another plant that was brought into our country for livestock purposes. It's amazing what we've done to ourselves. Regardless, it's a summer annual, but it is a prolific seed producer. So when it dies back, those seeds are on the ground. And if you are not going to do something to prevent the seeds from germinating, they will be back the following year. Prostrate knotweed. Interesting, and it gets its name because all along the little nodes, they appear to be knots, particularly when they spread out across the ground. This is sometimes an indicator plant of low quality soil, possible problem with the pH, but it's easily pulled. Prickly lettuce, again, I wanted to see what it would do. So this is the rosette for prickly lettuce, and here it is growing in my pathway. It's hard to see, but the spines are along the bottom of the midrib of the leaf. And at the point we have it there, it's not fully grown. Those spines are really soft to touch. But once the plant matures, those spines become much stiffer and more unpleasant to touch. By the way, it was easily pulled. Well, maybe not. I had to do a little loosening of the soil. But now we know what prickly lettuce looks like. Common groundsel, another easily pulled annual weed, interesting weed structure, but funny thing about it, you see these little, you think beginning blooms and you're waiting to see the bloom. That's not a bloom. That's the seed that's going to go all over the place. So if you don't want more of these, you get rid of the plant before it blooms. American burnweed, in some sources, they still call it fireweed, but there's another plant that's fireweed, so beware. This loves any vacant spot, hence the name burnweed, because it used to fill in areas after a fire had moved through. It's quite tall. The leaves wrap around the bottom of the stalk, and at the top, it's this lovely, you think going to be blooms. That is the bloom right there. When it opens up, it's seeds that will fly everywhere. I allowed, now this is not in my yard, it's down the street from me. The plant got a little over 5 feet tall. So it can be quite tall. It still is easily pulled. Eclipta, again, another annual that's easily pulled. Inconsequential little bloom. It will, if you let it grow, it gets fairly tall. Like I said, inconsequential bloom, but it quickly produces seeds. However, for some people, we have learned that it causes contact dermatitis. So think about this. If you're wondering, why did this rash come from? Well, if you brush this, you might have been one of the people allergic to Eclipta. And quickly, we're going to look at some biennials. These are the ones that are problem biennials for the most part. Garlic mustard is an invasive plant. And the bad thing about it is that it's a biennial. So it's going to produce the plant, the base plant 1 year, the seeds the next. And it moves, it doesn't care where it goes. It's moved into our naturalized areas, our woods, our grounds, everywhere. And it's awfully hard to control, but it can be pulled. So if you're walking through the woods and you see the white bloom, please pull the plant up, but don't leave it there, carry it out. Oops, excuse me. The other mustard out there is called wild or field mustard, which I bet this is going to be a surprise. It was brought into this country as livestock feed. It's interesting how we make all these decisions, but at any rate, it has a yellow flower. So you'll know the difference between this type mustard and garlic mustard. This too is a problem, but only in open fields. It does not move into the wooded areas, and it is easily pulled. Musk thistle, livestock really don't care for this one very much for some reason, but notice the rosette. Notice how strong it is. Notice how the leaves move out in strong stalks with the leaves grouped around the base. The bloom itself, the thistle itself, is a single stalk that comes up compared to bull thistle. Now, bull thistle, that's the rosette. Notice the leaf, totally different leaf, and notice how it flowers. It will have multiple blooms on a stalk, and it is spiny to touch. Not easily pulled, by the way. You want to dig that one up. Some of the woody vines that we've got a problem with, Japanese honeysuckle. I was really disappointed to learn that this is not a native plant, and in fact, it's invasive. It produces a lovely fragrance in the spring, but look what it can do when it's not controlled. It's a miniature version of kudzu. The autumn clematis was brought into, it's a beautiful plant. It blooms, as it says, in the autumn, but the problem is it's prolific. It seeds, it moves quickly. And if you drive along GW Parkway, you will see banks of it, and they're having a hard time controlling it. It is considered invasive. Trumpet creeper is a native vine, and it produces beautiful flowers, but it too can be a problem when it decides to climb your trees or climb your shrubs or something like that. So if you've got trumpet flower and you can find a way to control it, it is a gorgeous vine to have. Greenbrier. I have a very good friend who said one time, she said, no, how can they name such an elegant resort after such a noxious weed? I don't have an answer to that, but I can tell you that the only way to get rid of this weed is the technique that I showed you earlier, using the stake, the newspaper sleeve, and a systemic herbicide. Poison ivy is a native plant, so keep that in mind. You may want to consider that, but it responds best to a brush killer. And most of the brush killers are going to have triclopyr in it, which is a systemic herbicide. So it can be pulled when it's small, but carefully. And finally, we're right toward the end. These are two trees that volunteer in your garden. Both are invasive. One is the white mulberry tree. And the white mulberry initially has a small plant with the leaves that are entire, have a slightly serrated edge. But as it matures into a tree, and I'm sorry, I don't have that picture in here, the leaves become more like a mitten. It's a lobed leaf. The white berry, the birds love it, and so they plant it everywhere. This is considered an invasive tree. If you don't get the root, it does come back. Another invasive tree is tree of heaven, and it looks like a native tree called staghorn sumac. However, one of the ways to tell a difference is to take the leaves and really, kind of squeeze them, mash them up. And if it smells a little bit like burnt peanut butter, then you know it's tree of heaven. So here we are at the end. We've got to decide, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Well, I would suggest you take some time and you get to know the weeds in your yard and the neighborhood. Walk around, make a list, enjoy the exercise as you do it. This is the beginning. Identify the weeds, make a list. Notice where they're located, even photograph them, watch them mature. Who knows? Maybe you'll have spiny south thistle growing in your lawn. Become your own weed expert. Here are some sources that I highly recommend. And the first one is that Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. It was published in 1977, has not been updated. However, it is excellent for identifying wildflowers. It will not identify newly discovered plants, but it has a dichotomous key that is absolutely fantastic. I cannot recommend that book enough. Next is Weeds of the Northeast, also a wonderful reference, though you have to look at the pictures a little bit more. There's another one, smaller book, Identifying Seedlings and Mature Weeds. And that's a problem a lot of us have. We see the seedling, like of the cardinal flower, and if it doesn't look like the mature flower, we pull it out. So you need to identify what the seedling looks like. I also have one listed here, Turf and Ornamental Weed Guide. This is actually put out by one of the companies. It may have been Ortho. I don't know who put it out, but several of the turf grass producers will also put out a weed guide. So you can go online and see what they've got. Now the weed ID sites, and I've done the most of all by kind of what I really love. Virginia Tech has a great one. I love it. And University of Maryland has a very good one. Missouri, Weed ID of Missouri is very good. Skipping down here, the North Carolina site, the more I use it, I should have moved it up my list. It is outstanding. But what you need to know is that none of these sites will list all of the weeds. So it's a good idea to have them available so you can go to one site, doesn't talk about it, it goes to another, tells you a lot about it. And finally, on my iPhone, I have two apps that I really use a lot. One is iNaturalist, and I photograph a plant and I go through up and I said, what is it? Well, often they can't tell me what it is, but they can give me clues to what it is. I will then go to my Flora of Virginia app and check it out. By the way, the Flora of Virginia app is about $20, but it actually is excellent. I can't encourage it enough. I've just discovered a few other apps that I'm trying out, but I did not put them on my website. So I will pause. Are there any questions?
Yes, there certainly are. One participant has a full yard of stilt grass. Help.
A full yard of what was it?
Stilt grass.
Oh, no. I'm sorry to hear that. Well, all right. The absolute minimum you can do is mow it to keep it from producing seed. All right. And it's an annual. So mowing it and keeping it from producing seed may help. But what sometimes happens with these plants is you mow it and it says, okay, so I can't produce it at that height. I'll just produce the seeds a little lower. So watch out for it. It's going to find a way to produce seeds. Pulling it works, but if you've got a yard full, it may, particularly for the fall, it may make sense to go ahead and use an herbicide. And again, go on our chart, find out what, or go online actually and find out what chemical works, which chemical works the best.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Joyce. Another participant is trying to establish a 70-foot border of native plants in a bed that was previously occupied mostly by morning glories. This person,
I'm sorry, I
is-
shouldn't laugh.
I know, isn't it awful? Is still pulling up morning glories all the time and wonders if you have any other suggestions.
I really don't, other than mulching your plant. After you put in your native plant, mulch it. And that will keep the morning glory, most of the morning glory seeds from getting any sunlight. And that should help.
Okay, yeah, that's a good suggestion. Any hints for controlling liriope?
Dig it up. I've been there. I really have. When I realized it produced these seeds that kept going everywhere else, I started digging, but I discovered if I didn't get all the root, it did come back. So I have dug up probably a strip about 15 feet long. It was a border. And it took me a while to get everything out. And by the way, I did not compost it. I put it in the trash.
Okay.
But that's the best thing. It does not, because of the coarseness of the leaf, it doesn't respond well to herbicides. It's almost a waste of energy.
Okay. How about any hints for dealing with Lespedeza?
Well, it's a summer annual. And here's the deal. You've got to keep it from producing seeds. So the closer you can mow it may keep it from, producing seeds. That said, it too will find a way to produce seeds. So you can either cover it, smother it if you wish, and put down, because it's an annual, you're going to cover up the seeds. If you can put down, if you're trying to grow a lawn, for example, if you could put down a layer of compost and then put your seeds over it, it might control it. Putting down sod is expensive, but it definitely would control it. But the deal is you've got those seeds. So the other thing you might do, and it's going back and using the chemicals, is in the spring. So this is before it's producing seed, but you see it there. Get rid of it. You go ahead and use your herbicide. That, or one other possibility just came in my head. If you have the ability, take a shovel and scrape it up. It doesn't have deep roots, and it's an annual.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. What about boneset or eupatorium?
Well, those are actually native plants. So, you can dig them up, give them to someone else that wants them.
Yeah.
They're not really considered a problem.
And would you treat lesser celandine the same way as you would buttercup?
Lesser celandine is a headache and a half. At our help desk, many of our questions are about dealing with it, and there is no quick or easy answer to that. I'm going to suggest that they go online and in their search thing, type in how to get rid of lesser celandine, and at the end of the search string, put site, S-I-T-E, site:/edu.
Okay, good suggestion.
And it's a difficult one. I'm sorry. Whoever it is, I apologize to you.
And finally, 2 questions on English ivy, how to get rid of it and how to get rid of it without harming a tree.
All right. First of all, with English ivy that's already in your tree, what you do is you actually sever the connection between the roots and the vine going up the tree. And you make sure there's like a foot difference. You've cut out a foot so they can't touch each other. It will die in the tree. And when it's totally dry, it's fairly easy to pull it out of the tree. Now, for the part at the base that wants to keep growing, yes, we can use chemicals, but we're going to try to move away from it. It may help them, and think about this carefully, if they try to pull it, loosen the soil, but in late February or early March. What you're counting on then is taking advantage of the freeze-thaw cycle. So over the winter, as the ground has freeze-thawed, the soil has loosened, which may make it easier to pull it up. And you're going to have to keep doing this over and over for a couple of years, but you'll eventually get most of it.
Okay.
Okay.
That covers all the questions, Joyce. Thank you for such a lovely, extensive, comprehensive look at weeds. The only discouraging part was I have an awful lot of them in my yard.
Well, now, like I said, physical exercise, the Zen experience, commune with nature, go out and dig.
Okay. And we have lots of nice thanks from many of the participants. So thank you again.
Well, I enjoy doing it. And again, our help desk works hard to answer all your questions.